Competitive Pokemon has been around since 1997, when the first Nintendo Cup was first introduced. That's almost 10 years before I was even born. So, over time, obviously, there's been a lot of different opinions flying around, since like forever. However, there's also a lot of myths and misconceptions about competitive singles because of that. Some about the competitive game as a whole, some about certain tiers, and some about certain Pokemon. So we're going to be going over some of them, analyzing them, and seeing how much of it is true and how much is false. Ferrothorn. Let's play two truths and a lie. A. Ferrothorn is a homophobe, Ferrothorn is racist, and Ferrothorn is a stallmon. Well, if you chose C, Ferrothorn is a stallmon, you're right, because one popular myth/misconception is that Ferrothorn is a stallmon. This is due to a combination of a few factors: his typing, his stats, his ability, etc. Ferrothorn has a grass-steel typing, one of the best defensive typings in the game. He has a total of 1 immunity and 9 resistances. That is insane. Offensively, it's not bad either, being super effective against ground, rock, water, fairy, and ice, but Ferrothorn is known for putting that defensive typing to use. This pairs well with his amazing stats of 131 defense and 116 special defense. Alongside that, its ability Iron Barbs further emphasizes his defensive capabilities, punishing physical attackers, and pairs well with Rocky Helmet. All of this talk about punishing attackers and its defenses sure sounds a lot like a stallmon, you might be saying. And yeah, that's true. You can use Ferrothorn for stall technically. He's actually a lot better suited for bulky offense teams. Historically, the Pokemon Ferrothorn has been paired with have been offensive Pokemon. There's a reason Ferrothorn is so good on rain teams. For example, rain teams, being obviously super offensively oriented, need Ferrothorn's defensive capabilities for support. Pokemon like Tapu Lele, Weavile, Urshifu Rapid Spin, or Garchomp really do need that support. Although Ferrothorn's move pool seems perfect for stall because of Spikes, Stealth Rock, Toxic, and Leech Seed, this further makes him feel like a stall Pokemon, but he's actually missing one major thing: a recovery move. The closest thing he has to it is Leech Seed, which isn't particularly enough. That's one of the reasons Ferrothorn has even run Choice Band in the past and gone full offense. I mean, he'll run moves like Power Whip and Gyro Ball. There's no other quote-unquote stall Pokemon you will see ever doing this. To prove my point, let's look at Toxapex. When he got his move pool nerfed by taking away Scald and Knockoff, some players started running Assault Vest Toxapex. Assault Vests boost your special defense, but only lets you choose damaging moves, so he would only run offensive moves such as Sludge Bomb, Surf, and Infestation. However, it just wasn't as good as the original Toxapex, the original stall Toxapex, and so Toxapex fell to UU. Why am I talking about that? Well, in that sense, we can see the difference between a Toxapex, a full-on stallmon trying to embrace its offensive sets, and Ferrothorn, a non-stallmon embracing offensive sets. Just to be clear, I'm not saying Ferro is a full-on late-game sweeper or anything, no, but he is different. Support does not equal stall, is what I'm trying to say. Now yeah, Ferrothorn on stall isn't necessarily bad, but to be fair, Ferrothorn on any team isn't really bad, because he's just that good. But the teams Ferrothorn is best on usually are, like I said, bulky offense, hard balance, or even hazard stack. There's a lot you can say about VGC versus singles, but the topic I want to talk about is which one is more popular. Depending on who you ask, you will get different answers. If you base your answer on just what you see on YouTube, who is the most popular PokeTubers, for example, it might seem like singles is far more popular of a format, but it's a bit more complicated. Singles has a bit of a longer history compared to VGC, since at the beginning, there were actually very little VGC tournaments ever being held, and the competitive singles community had a lot more of an active player base, with the early Pokemon battle simulators like Shoddy making it a lot easier for singles players versus VGC players who had crumbs. I guess some things never change. Although even now genning can be quite infuriating to the task, in the early gens it was even worse. Although now making teams for VGC can still be an infuriating task, back in the old days it was even worse. It could take weeks to make your first Pokemon team, and if you needed to change something, or God forbid your team as a whole didn't work, you were screwed. That's weeks of progress just straight to the trash. Competitive singles had a lot more time to foster an active player base and just a general community. So at the start, singles was indeed a lot more popular because it was actually being played more and more enjoyable to play. You did not need to waste a whole bunch of time to raise a Pokemon. You could just play a match, which is, the whole point and the whole reason people play in the first place. But what about now? Nowadays, VGC has a lot more to offer, now with a lot more popularity as well. So what's more popular? Now, numbers-wise, we really cannot compare since the formats are so different. We would have to know the exact numbers of players going to events, plus the amount of players that do VGC via Showdown, and then compare that to the people that play singles, and decide which format should we count. Should we count the players playing Gen I Know You only, or the past gens? Needless to say, it gets really complicated and confusing. but we don't need to know the actual numbers. What we do know is where these two formats are the most popular in. Although Smogon does have international communities, most of the player base is from the West, and most notably the US. While there is starting to be a notable Chinese community, it is most popular in the US, whereas VGC seems to be a lot more popular in Japan. This makes sense. VGC is the official format, Pokemon is used in Japan, and Pokemon Showdown is in English, not in Japanese. Most competitive players in Japan play VGC. I'm not even sure that most of them are aware about Showdown's existence. So what format is the most popular? Well, it depends mostly on the country. Generation 5. Generation 5 has one of the worst reputations of any gen.
Scathing hatred for Gen 5 OU is no secret. I think Gen 5 OU is the worst OU metagame by far. I think it's embarrassing that we have it in tournaments in the state that it's in, and has been for a while. It's part of what makes it such an embarrassment. Have great wrath towards of the most diehard Gen 5 OU truthers. They saw the light, and while playing it in SPL and preparing for it and all that, then they suddenly were like, wait a second, this tier sucks.
Partly because it has the image of a turbulent, hyper offense, weather wars, power creep infested generation with controversial bans and bad balancing. Kinda reminds me of another gen. So yeah, Gen 5 is one of the most hated generations. Let's go through those points. Gen 5 has a reputation for really bad balancing and having several Pokemon that are just too powerful for the tier. But is that true? Well, kind of. See, it's not just that Gen 5 has a lot of explosive powerhouses, but historically, like I mentioned, it has a lot of bans. For example, they banned Manaphy and Blaziken all in 2011, then Excadrill, Genesect, and Thundurus in 2012. But wait, you might say, you can still use Thundurus and Excadrill right now. Yeah, that's the thing. It's one thing for a generation to have lots of bans, but just like in Gen 9, the turbulent atmosphere was due mostly to the banning than unbanning of Pokemon. Pokemon like Excadrill, Thundurus, Curie, and Black, Landorus, Tornadus T, and Garchomp were all Pokemon that were banned initially and then unbanned, even up until recently with Cloyster and Gems being banned. So it's not only that, but strategies such as Sun and Baton Pass have been nerfed as well, although those were good. I'm not saying these bans were bad. So is all of it true? Well, it certainly used to be true, yeah. But the Gen 5 OU tier is now at a point where it's a lot more playable. It took a very long time, but now it's better. It doesn't mean Gen 5 is perfect. It's pretty restrictive in the sense that you either seem to have to run Weather War teams or Hyper Offense, with teams like Balance and Stall taking a back seat. But after all those bans, even if it took 15 years, I think we can finally say that Gen 5 OU is finally a good competitive tier. Now, Bug is the worst typing. If you ask your average competitive player what's the worst typing in competitive singles, well, a few types will come up. Rock, Psychic, and Grass. But usually the type that gets brought up overwhelmingly so is the Bug type. Now, what is the worst type? I feel like it's highly debatable. It's Psychic, it's actually Psychic. But I think there's a few reasons why, if you're thinking objectively, Bug just can't be the worst one. And it all comes down to moves. I think that when we consider type characteristics, we should consider overall base stats, Pokemon, and moves. Here's the thing, the Bug type has two very important moves in competitive Pokemon. I'm talking, of course, about Sticky Web and U-Turn. Let's start with Sticky Web. Hazards are important in competitive play. Just having Stealth Rocks and Spikes gives you a leg up on other Pokemon, potentially giving you a bit of a niche even. Sticky Web is like that, but like 1,000 times more. For example, let's take a Pokemon like Ribombee. There was a point where Ribombee had a usage rate of 13.99 in Ubers, which is higher than other actual legendaries and actual Uber-ranked Pokemon, like multiple Arceus forms and Flutter Mane. The reason why? Sticky Web. Now, of course, not every Sticky Web user is used in Ubers. Ribombee has other good qualities, like the Fairy typing and a notable good speed stat, but none of that would matter if it didn't have Sticky Web. Sticky Web is particularly good, especially when you run a metagame that is very offensively oriented. Because obviously, if you're in a metagame dominated by Stall, then you don't care about speed. However, offense and speed go hand in hand. Also, you're less likely to use heavy duty boots because you'll be using maybe Choice Band, Choice Specs, Choice Scarf, Expert Belt, etc. And well, you can say a lot of things about Gen 9, but boy is it offensively oriented, especially Ubers. Now on to U-Turn. I don't think I need to tell you how good U-Turn is. It's great offensively and defensively. It can allow you to be a good team player, taking a hit then switching out, and obviously offensively, you get that chip damage and it's great. You switch into a better Pokemon afterwards. It's also the most popular switching move with the best distribution. It's such a good move that often people don't even say, this Pokemon has a weakness to Bug, but rather this Pokemon has a weakness to U-Turn. It's one of the reasons that the Psychic type suffers so much. It's one of the few moves that literally every single Pokemon can benefit from no matter the role. Sweeper, Tank, Supportmon, everything. Everyone benefits from this. I think that because these moves are so important and are a defining feature of not only the bug type but competitive play in general, we cannot say it's the worst. Especially when the psychic type has been struggling more and more, as it just starts looking like a bootleg fairy type, and it hasn't really been getting any better. Like, don't get me wrong, there's good psychic types, but as cool as it sounds, if we switch those psychic type Pokemon's typing for fairy, they would all be a lot better, with possibly the exception of Galarian Slowking. In short, no one is particularly excited to see a Pokemon that is part psychic typing. Oh yippee, stab, Zen Headbutt, or Future Sight is not a common sentiment, but oh, stab U-turn? That is a lot more exciting. And for that reason, no, bug is not the worst type. That's my list of quote-unquote myths or misconceptions about competitive Pokemon. I understand there are more and you may disagree, so feel free to tell me. Thank you.